where the rain or fire sound never stops, and the stories never rush you. You don't need to watch, just listen. Settle in. Close your eyes if you'd like, before the story begins. Where in the world are you listening from? And are you planning to sleep or stay awake with me? If this helps you rest, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Mara Collins lay frozen in the narrow bed, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. The bell had rung again, not the gentle chime of a doorbell or the distant toll of a church clock, but the full-throated iron clang of a 19th century steeple bell, as if swung by someone with violent intent. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She simply listened. The vibration seemed to live inside her ribcage, rattling against her sternum with each pulse. The rental cottage on Kaskaskia Island had been advertised as a peaceful retreat for historians and writers. But this was the third night in a row the bell had woken her at exactly the same minute. Her phone read 3:03 a.m. Always 3:03. Shed checked the church at the end of the dirt road earlier. That day, its doors were padlocked shut. The steeple empty since 1987. So where was the sound coming from? The last ring echoed off for 7 seconds. Then silence swallowed the room whole. Mara pulled the blanket up to her chin and stared at the darkness where the doorway should be. By dawn, Mara convinced herself it had been a dream. The brain does that, rewrites reality into something digestible, something that doesn't require you to admit you might be losing your grip. She stepped outside into the damp August morning and walked the perimeter of the cottage. The grass was wet, the mosquitoes thick, and the air smelled of river silt and decay. Kaskaskia Island sat in the middle of the Mississippi, a tiny patch of land that had once been the first capital of Illinois before the river swallowed most of it. Now it held only a few houses, a church, and an empty general store. Mara had come here to finish restoring a set of 1840s parish records for the Illinois State Archive, a job Shed taken because it paid well and required no human interaction. She was 29, a document conservator by trade, and her preferred method of dealing with people was avoiding them entirely. The bell had not rung during daylight hours. That made it easier to pretend. She poured coffee from a thermos and sat on the porch steps, watching the brown water creep along the western edge of the island. Her workspace occupied the cottage's second bedroom, a cramped room with a single window and a rickety pine table, documents fanned out across the surface, baptismal records, marriage certificates, death notices, all handwritten in French, some barely legible. Mara had spent the last 6 days gently cleaning each page with a soft brush, stabilizing tears with Japanese tissue, and digitizing everything for the archive. It was slow, meditative work, the kind of work she craved, because it filled her head with facts instead of feelings. Shed applied for the position after a particularly bad breakup, the kind that leaves you questioning your own judgment and your own memory, and the isolation of Kaskaskia Island had seemed like an antidote. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just the documents, the river, and the quiet. The job posting had mentioned a minor supernatural reputation attached to the location, but Mara had dismissed it as tourism marketing. Every old town had its ghost stories. They were scripted, predictable, and safe. She had been wrong. Around noon, Mara walked the half-mile to St. Anne's Church. The structure was a squat brick building with a bell tower that had been boarded up before she was born. Shed read the local history. A flood in 1844 had nearly destroyed the original church, and the replacement had been built on higher ground. But higher ground on Kaskaskia Island had turned out to be relative. By the 1970s, the congregation had dwindled to less than a dozen families, and the church was deconsecrated in 1983. Now it sat abandoned. She tried the door anyway, pulling at the chain. It held firm. Through a grime-caked window, she could see empty pews, a fallen chandelier, and a single red votive candle that had burned down to a pool of wax. Someone had been here recently. Someone had lit that candle. The bell tower above her head contained no bell that much was visible from the ground, where the arched openings showed nothing but empty space and bird droppings, so the sound Shed heard couldn't have been physical. She told herself that was a relief. A truck pulled up the gravel drive at 4:17 p.m. Mara watched it from the kitchen window, her hand instinctively resting on the counter edge. The man who stepped out was in his late 60s, sun-beaten skin, a cap that read Kaskaskia Volunteer Fire. He carried a paper bag and approached the porch with the slow gait of someone who knew the island and its rhythms. "You're the archivist," he said. It wasn't a question. She opened the screen door and took the bag corn, tomatoes, a jar of honey. "Neighbors look out for each other out here," he said. "Name's Roy Dillard. I live 2 miles north." She thanked him and waited. Roy didn't leave. Instead, he looked past her shoulder at the documents on the table and said something that made her stomach clench. "You've been hearing the bell at night." He didn't ask it as if it were odd. He asked it as if it were a known fact, like the river rising in spring or the geese flying south. Mara said nothing, and Roy nodded slowly. as if her silence confirmed everything. She didn't eat much that evening. Roy's question had unsettled her more than the bell itself. The way he said it, not "did you hear something?" but "you've been hearing." The bell suggested that the experience was expected, routine even. She sat at the kitchen table as the rain started, drawing patterns in condensation on the window glass. Her phone had no signal, but that had never bothered her before. Now it felt like a liability. The nearest town proper, Chester, Illinois, was across the bridge. But the bridge could flood in heavy rain, and the island had a way of becoming inaccessible without warning. She pulled out the parish records again, hoping the work would settle her thoughts. That's when she noticed something Shed missed. One of the baptismal entries from August 1844 listed a child's name crossed out, then rewritten in a different hand. The original name was Jean-Baptiste Bellinger. The corrected name was simply the Bell. Below it, someone had written in pencil, "Do not toll for the living." She stared at the words until her vision blurred. The pencil mark was not on the original document. It had been added later, maybe decades later, by someone who had access to the record after it was filed. Mara examined it under magnification, but the graphite was too smudged to date. She spent the next hour flipping through the rest of the 1844 entries, looking for similar annotations. She found 3 more. Each contained the same phrase, "Do not toll for the living." Each was entered next to a baptism or marriage involving a family named Bellinger. She cross-referenced the name with later records and found that the Bellinger family had vanished from the island entirely after 1846. No death certificates, no burial plots, just an abrupt end to their appearance in the registry. The rain hammered the roof. The wind picked up, rattling the window frames. And at exactly 3:03 a.m., the bell rang again, but this time it sounded closer. This time, Mara was certain it came from inside the house. The ring had been so close that the walls vibrated. Mara shot up from the couch Shed fallen asleep reading and stood in the hallway with a flashlight from her emergency kit. The cottage had only 3 rooms and a bathroom. There was nowhere for a bell to hide. She checked the closets, the crawl space under the house, the attic hatch. No bell, no mechanism, no speaker. She stood in the center of the living room, breathing hard, and tried to convince herself that the acoustics of an old house could play tricks, that sound carried strange distances over water, that perhaps she was hearing the bell from another island entirely. But Kaskaskia was the only inhabited island in this stretch of the Mississippi, and every structure on it was within walking distance. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. She sat in a chair facing the front door, the flashlight on her lap. The parish records open to the Bellinger pages. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she knew the bell wasn't finished with her. Morning came slowly, damp and gray. Mara chose to walk back to St. Anne's Church, this time with a different goal. She wasn't there to verify the tower was empty. She was there to find the Bellinger plot. Cemetery records weren't digitized, but she had found a hand-drawn map from 1921 in the archive. The Bellinger family had been buried in the northeastern quadrant of St. Anne's graveyard, a section that now lay under 12 feet of mud from the 1973 flood. Their headstones had never been recovered, but the map indicated a marker, a small iron bell mounted on a post. She found it exactly where the map said it would be. The bell was no larger than her fist, rusted solid. Its clapper fused to the rim by a century of oxidation. It was a grave marker, a boundary bell, used in French Catholic tradition to mark the edge of consecrated ground. It couldn't ring. It hadn't rung in generations. She touched it anyway, and the metal was cold, but not as cold as the air around it. Think about this. If you found a grave marker that matched the exact object you'd been hearing in your house every night, would you assume coincidence? Or would you start to believe that something was trying to get your attention? Mara knelt in the wet grass, staring at the corroded bell. The fog thickened, reducing the world to a pale gray bubble. She could hear the river moving, a low, constant sound like someone breathing through a tube. She traced her finger across the rust and found an inscription carved into the post. Jean Baptiste Bellanger, Mort pour la cloche, died for the bell. She didn't know what that meant, but she knew it meant something. She spent the afternoon at the Chester Public Library, using their microfilm to access old Kaskaskia newspapers from the 1840s. The search took hours. She found it on a page dated November 12, 1846. The headline read, "Bellinger's son missing after church. Bell incident accidental or otherwise." 5 lines of text. Jean Baptiste, age 12, had been found at the base of the original church bell tower. The bell had fallen, or he had pulled it down, or something in between. The article was deliberately vague. The church had been closed for repairs. The boy should not have been inside. No one had seen what happened. But the article ended with a quote from the priest that made Mara's skin pull tight. The bell did not fall. It was answered. Mara printed the article and read it 7 times. The bell did not fall. It was answered. That phrasing nagged at her like a splinter under the skin. It suggested a dialogue, a call and response between something outside the physical world and the object itself. She returned to the island as the sun dropped behind the tree line, the bridge empty, the road dust swirling. The cottage felt different now. The silence had weight. She set up her camera on a tripod in the living room, pointed it at the center of the room, and let it record through the night. She didn't sleep. She sat in the corner, watching the red light blink, waiting for 3:03 a.m. When it came, the bell did not ring. Instead, the camera captured something else. When she reviewed the footage in the morning, she saw that at exactly 3:03, the temperature in the room dropped by 14 degrees, according to the ambient sound shift, and a single dark shape passed across the lens, too fast to identify. It had moved from the hallway to the kitchen. The bell didn't ring, but something had. The tapping started at 2:17 a.m. Not the random thud of a branch against glass thighs, was deliberate. 3 even knocks, then a pause, then 3 more. Julia Chen pressed her palms flat against the mattress and forced herself to breathe. Her bedroom window faced the side yard, overlooking the Bellamy's driveway next door. But the sound came from the front, from the living room bay window, the one that faced the street. She checked her phone again. No alerts from the Ring camera shed, installed 2 weeks ago. No motion detected. Shed set the sensitivity to maximum after the first note appeared in her mailbox. Still, the tapping continued, soft but undeniable, like someone using a single fingernail against the pane. Julia slid out of bed, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. She crept to the hallway, heart hammering so loud she worried it would give her away. From the dark archway of the living room, she could see the window. The street lamp outside cast a pale amber wash across the lawn. No one stood there, but on the windowsill, pressed against the glass from the outside, was a single piece of paper. Julia didn't open the door. She didn't slide the window up. She stood frozen, the lettering visible even from 10 feet away. I know what you did. The handwriting was cramped, blocky, drawn in what looked like charcoal. She had seen that same style before. 3 days ago, a similar note had been shoved under her welcome mat. That one read, "Welcome to the neighborhood, Julia." The mailman had delivered a package addressed to Julia Chen, with no return address. Inside, a single photograph of her childhood home in Portland, Oregon, a place she hadn't lived in for 15 years, a place nobody in Oak Park, Illinois, should know about. She had moved here to escape, not from anything criminal, but from the weight of a past that kept finding her online. Shed deleted her social media, changed her phone number, used a PO box for bills, that someone had still found her, and now they were leaving physical traces, trespassing onto her property, watching her through windows. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked her phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher asked for her location. She gave it, and then the dispatcher said something that made the room tilt. "Mom, we've already had a call about that address tonight. From a neighbor. He said someone was trying to break in." Officer Morales arrived at 3:45 a.m. He was a heavy-set man with a tired face, the kind of cop who had seen too many false alarms in suburban neighborhoods. He walked around the property, shone a flashlight into the bushes, examined the note with gloved hands. "Looks like someone's playing games," he said, not unkindly. "You said you've had other incidents." Julia nodded, her arms wrapped around herself. She told him about the photograph, the notes, the sense that someone was tracking her every move. She told him about the call shed received last week, a voice she didn't recognize, male, calm, that said, "Your coffee order is 2 pumps vanilla, not 3. You've been trying to cut back." She had slammed the phone down. The barista at the cafe 3 blocks away knew her order, but Shed never told anyone else. Morales wrote it down, but didn't seem alarmed. He suggested she install better locks, maybe a security system. "Could be a neighbor who's got a crush," he said, "or someone from that online freelance community. You said you do graphic design. People get obsessed." Julia wanted to scream. This wasn't a crush. This was intimate knowledge kind that required access to her email, her browser history, her private conversations. She had checked her laptop for malware, changed all passwords, wiped her phone. The only explanation she could think of was impossible. That someone was inside her house when she wasn't home and reading her mind. Oak Park had seemed like the perfect fresh start. Quiet streets lined with old oak trees, historic houses with wide front porches, a community of families and retirees. Julia had rented the 2-bedroom bungalow on Grove Avenue, sight unseen. Seduced by the photos of the bay window and the fenced backyard, it was a place where she could disappear. She had moved from Portland after a messy divorce. But more than that, she had wanted to sever the digital threads that connected her to a life she no longer recognized. She worked freelance, took clients via encrypted emails, and kept her head down. For the first month, everything was fine. She learned the rhythms of the street. The mailman came at 11, the school bus at 3:15, and every evening at dusk, the elderly man across the street would sit on his porch swing and watch the world go by. His name was Harold Finch, had learned that from the mailboxes. He was tall, thin, with white hair and a face that looked like it had been folded too many times. He nodded at her whenever she walked to her car. He seemed harmless, but it was Harold who had called the police that night. He had reported a suspicious person at her door. When Julia thanked him the next morning, he smiled, and his eyes held something she couldn't name. "I keep an eye on things," he said. "You can't be too careful." His gaze lingered on her face for a second too long. She thanked him again and hurried inside, locking the door behind her. 2 weeks later, the email started. Not the spam folder primary inbox. The sender address was always different, but the subject line was the same. "You know what you did." The body contained fragments of her life, pulled from places she had never posted. A screenshot of her search history from 3 years ago. How to tell if someone is tracking your phone. A photo of her ex-husband at a party she had never attended. A link to a deleted blog she'd written in college, now resurrected on a server she didn't recognize. Julia spent hours trying to trace the IP addresses. They bounced through proxies in Romania, then Brazil, then onion domains she couldn't access. Her computer ran slower, and she noticed her webcam light flickering, even when no application was running. She covered it with tape. She began sleeping with the lights on. She called her friend Maya in Seattle, who worked in cybersecurity. Maya listened, then asked a question that made Julia's blood run cold. "Do you have a smart home device? Like a thermostat, a doorbell, a speaker?" Julia did. The previous tenant had left a Nest thermostat and a Ring doorbell. She had never thought much of it. Maya told her to disconnect them immediately. "Those things can be hacked," she said. "Someone could watch you through the sensors. But more importantly, they could listen. Everything you say inside your house could be recorded." Julia unplugged both devices that night. She felt a fragile sense of control. But when she went to bed, she heard the tapping again. 3 knocks, then 3 more, this time from inside the wall. Julia pressed her ear against the plaster, holding her breath. The tapping had stopped, but now she could hear something else, a faint humming, like a machine running behind the wall. This was an old house, built in 1925. The wiring was outdated, and sometimes the pipes made noises. But this hum had a rhythm, a pattern. It almost sounded like a hard drive spinning up. She backed away and stared at the wall. There was a small vent near the floor, the kind used for heating. She knelt down and peered through the slats. She could see the outline of the basement, stairs through the grating. She had never gone down there. The real estate agent had warned her the basement was unfinished, used mostly for storage, and she had no reason to explore it. But now she wondered if there was something else down there, a hidden room. A server, someone living in the crawl space. She tried to laugh at the absurdity, but the sound died in her throat. She grabbed a flashlight and a hammer from the kitchen drawer. She unlocked the basement door. It was a heavy wooden thing with a deadbolt she had never turned. The door swung open, and a gust of cold, stale air hit her face. She shone the light down the stairs. At the bottom, she saw something red blinking, a small lead light attached to a box she couldn't identify, tucked behind the water heater. She took one step down. The light went out. Julia's foot hovered over the second step. The darkness below felt thick, like a liquid she could wade into. She forced herself to descend, each step creaking under her weight. The flashlight beam swept across the basement, a typical unfinished space, with exposed joists, cobwebs, and a concrete floor. But behind the water heater, she found it. A metal box, about the size of a shoebox, with a small antenna and a blinking green LED that had just turned back on. Wires ran from the box up along the pipe, disappearing into a hole drilled into the ceiling. She traced the wires with her light. They led to the first floor where her living room was, where her desk sat, where she had spent hours on the computer. She pulled the box from its hiding spot. It was warm to the touch. On the bottom, a label. Spectre Devices, Model SX 2000, for authorized personnel only. This was a surveillance transmitter, a high-end one. Someone had installed it here before she moved in. They had known she would rent this house. They had known her name, her job, her habits. They had been watching her for months. She ripped the wires out, but the green light stayed on. The box had battery backup. She dropped it on the floor and stomped on it, but it didn't break. She was breathing hard now, panic rising. She needed to get out. She ran up the stairs, slammed the basement door, and locked it. She grabbed her phone to call the police again, but the screen showed a message, already typed in her text thread. "I wouldn't do that, Julia. You still haven't answered my question." The name on the text thread was unknown. She had never saved it. The message had 3 dots, showing that the sender was still typing. Then another message appeared. "I am not a stranger. I am the person you forgot, the one you left behind." Julia's throat tightened. She had a sister, 2 years younger, disappeared when Julia was 19. They had been camping in the Columbia River Gorge, and Chloe had walked away from the campsite to take photos at sunset. She never came back. The search parties found nothing. No body, no evidence. The case went cold. Julia had spent years blaming herself. She had been the one who suggested the trip, the one who fell asleep while Chloe wandered off. She had seen therapists, tried to move on, but the guilt never left. And now this stalker, this intruder, knew about Chloe. But how? The case had been sealed after the first year. Her family never talked about it publicly. Julia typed back, her fingers shaking. "Who are you?" The reply came instantly. "I am the person who found Chloe. She's alive, Julia, and she wants to see you. But first, you have to come to me. The shed behind your house. Tonight at midnight. Think about this if that happened to you. Would you go? Or would you call the police and risk losing the only lead you'd ever had?" Julia paced the kitchen for an hour, the phone warm in her hand. She tried calling the number back. It went straight to a voicemail that didn't exist, a generic robotic female voice saying the mailbox was full. She called Maya, her cybersecurity friend, and told her everything. Maya's voice was tense. "Julia, this is a trap. Whoever this is, they've been planning this for months. They knew about your sister, your house, your past. They're using your guilt against you. Don't go." Julia wanted to agree. Every rational part of her screamed that this was dangerous, insane. But the possibility that Chloe was alive at that, she could finally have answers overwhelmed her. She had spent 13 years wondering. 13th years of nightmares. If there was even a sliver of a chance, she had to take it. She grabbed a knife from the drawer and slipped it into her jacket pocket. She checked the backyard through the kitchen window. The shed stood at the far end of the property, half hidden behind a tangle of overgrown bushes. Its door was closed. A single light burned inside a yellow rectangle in the gloom. She watched the shed for 10 minutes. Nothing moved. No one approached. She turned off her phone if she recorded herself. Maybe shed have evidence. She stepped out the back door. The night air was cold, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. The grass was wet. Her footsteps were silent. She crossed the yard toward the shed, her heart drumming against her ribs. The house settled at 3:47 a.m. That's what Maya told herself at first. Old houses settle. The floorboards expand. The pipes contract. The bones of the building adjust to the cooling night. She repeated this like a prayer, her back pressed against the headboard, the digital clock on her nightstand painting the room in pale red numerals. But the sound wasn't settling. It was footsteps, measured, unhurried, deliberate. One step, then a pause. Another step. The carpet in the hallway outside her bedroom muffled the sound just enough that she almost doubted it. She gripped the edge of the blanket so tightly her knuckles whitened. The footsteps stopped just outside her door. The old brass doorknob didn't have a lock. It never needed one. Not until tonight. She watched the thin strip of darkness beneath the door, waiting for a silhouette to block the light from the hall. Nothing came, but she could feel something breathing on the other side. The air in the room grew cold, heavy, wrong, and then the footsteps resumed, moving away down the stairs. By 6:00 a.m., dawn had crept through the blinds, and Maya felt foolish enough to get out of bed. She checked every room: the kitchen, the living room, the spare bedroom she used as a studio, the bathroom with its cracked porcelain sink, all empty. The front door was still deadbolted. The windows were still locked from the inside. There was no sign that anyone had been in the house at all. She told herself it was her imagination. The move had been stressful. 3 weeks of packing, of negotiations falling through, of sleeping on an air mattress surrounded by boxes. Her mind was frayed. She made coffee, sat at the kitchen counter, and pulled up the listing for the house on her phone. A renovated Victorian in Carson City, Nevada, built in 1892. The Realtor had called it a diamond in the rough. Maya had called it affordable. That should have been the first warning. The photos showed clean lines, fresh paint, modern fixtures. But what the photos hadn't captured was the way. The hallway seemed longer than the floor plan suggested, or how certain doors never stayed closed. Maya Reed was 34 years old, a freelance graphic designer who had spent the last 6 years in a 1-bedroom apartment in Reno. She had moved to Carson City for the quiet, for the space, for the chance to own something that was actually hers. The house on Minnesota Street had seemed like a dream. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a backyard with an ancient oak tree. The price had been suspiciously low, but the Realtor had explained that the previous owner had passed away, and the family just wanted to sell quickly. Maya hadn't asked questions. That was her flaw. She never asked questions when the answer might complicate what she wanted. Her mother had called it optimism. Her ex-boyfriend had called it willful ignorance. Either way, it had served her well enough until now. She spent her first week painting the living room a pale sage green, hanging curtains, arranging her books alphabetically on the built-in shelves. She felt proud of herself. She felt safe. But on the 8th night, she woke at exactly 3:47 a.m. to the sound of her bedroom door creaking open. She had closed it before bed. She always closed it. The door had a tendency to drift. But she had wedged a folded piece of cardboard under the edge to keep it shut. The cardboard was now lying on the floor in the hallway. Maya stared at it from her bed, her breath shallow, her heart pressing against her ribs like a trapped bird. The door hung open, maybe 6 inches, just enough to see the darkness of the hall beyond, just enough to feel the cold air seeping through the gap. She told herself she must have forgotten to wedge it properly. She told herself the house was old. The frame was warped. The door had somehow pushed the cardboard out. She got up, closed the door, wedged the cardboard back into place, and went to the bathroom. When she came back, the door was open again. She stood in the hallway, barefoot on the cold wood, and looked at the door as if it might offer an explanation. It offered nothing but silence. She closed it a third time, and this time she didn't go back to sleep. She sat in the armchair by the window and watched the door until dawn. The next morning, Maya did what any rational person would do. She measured the door. She measured the frame. She checked the hinges for misalignment. Everything was square. Everything was level. The door should have stayed closed. She tested it by setting the cardboard wedge and then tapping the door lightly. It didn't budge. She pushed harder. Still didn't move. She walked across the room, jumped, and landed heavily. The door stayed shut. There was no physical reason for it to swing open on its own in the middle of the night. She considered the possibility of a draft, but the house had central heating and the windows were sealed. She considered the possibility of a rodent pushing against it. But what rodent could move a solid oak door? She considered the possibility that she was sleepwalking and opening it herself. That seemed the most likely. She had never sleepwalked before, but there was a first time for everything. She bought a small camera from a local electronics store and set it up in the hallway, pointed at her bedroom door. Before she went to bed that night, she wanted proof. She wanted to know she wasn't losing her mind. At 3:47 a.m., the door opened. Maya watched the footage the next morning on her laptop, her coffee growing cold beside her. The timestamp ticked over, and then the door simply swung inward, as if someone on the other side had pushed it. The camera angle showed the hallway beyond, empty and dark. Nothing walked through the frame. No hand appeared around the edge of the door. It just opened. Then it stayed open for 17 minutes. At 4:04 a.m., it swung shut again, returning to its original position. Maya watched it 3 times. She slowed the footage down to half speed, then quarter speed. She zoomed in on the gap between the door and the frame, looking for any distortion, any shadow, any hint of movement. There was nothing. The door moved as if it were alive, as if it had decided to open itself. She checked the camera's motion sensor logs. It had been triggered at 3:47, and then again at 4:04. Nothing in between. She called her mother that afternoon and didn't mention the footage. She talked about the garden, the oak tree, how she was settling in. She didn't mention that she was afraid to go to bed. The 3rd week, the doors started opening at different times. just her bedroom door, but the closet door in the spare room, the pantry door in the kitchen, the bathroom door. Maya would come home from a grocery run and find every door in the house standing wide open. She would close them all, lock them, wedge them, and they would be open again within hours. The pattern was never the same. Sometimes they opened while she was in the house. She would be reading on the couch and hear the click of a latch, the slow creak of hinges, and know that somewhere behind her, a door was swinging open. She stopped turning her back on hallways. She stopped walking past open doorways without checking them first. She started sleeping with the lights on. The camera footage continued to show nothing. Doors opened, doors closed, no visible cause. She sent the footage to a friend who worked in video editing, asking if he could see anything she was missing. He called her back and said the footage looked clean, but asked her if she was okay. She told him she was fine. She was lying. The air in the house had changed. It felt thicker, heavier, like the pressure before a storm. And sometimes, when she stood in the hallway at night, she could feel eyes on her back. The first time she saw it, she thought it was a trick of the light. She was walking from the kitchen to the living room, carrying a cup of tea, when she caught a movement in her peripheral vision. She turned. The hallway was empty, but the shadow at the far end, near the door to the basement, seemed darker than it should have been, as if the darkness had gathered there, like water pooling in a low spot. She stared at it for a long moment. The shadow didn't move. She told herself it was just the angle of the lamp, the way the light fell across the wall. She walked past it quickly, her skin prickling, and didn't look back. That night, she woke at 3:47 a.m. again. But this time she didn't wait. She sat up in bed and looked at the door. It was closed. She had wedged it with cardboard and taped the wedge in place. It was still closed. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Then she looked at the foot of her bed. Someone was standing there. A shape, taller than a person should be, darker than the darkness around it. It had no features, no edges, no form she could describe. It was just an absence where something should have been. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Her throat had closed, and then it was gone. She blinked, and it was gone. But the cold remained. Think about this. If that happened to you, what would you do? Maya did what anyone would do. She went to the library. She spent 3 days in the Nevada State Archives, digging through property records, newspaper microfiche, and historical society documents. She found the original deed for the house, dated 1892. The first owner was a man named Elias Thorne, a carpenter who had built the house for his wife and daughter. The daughter's name was Margaret. She died in 1895 at the age of 7. The cause of death was listed as consumption, but a later newspaper article mentioned that Margaret had been found in the basement after a fall. The article was brief. It said the child had been playing where she should not have been. Elias Thorne sold the house in 1896 and moved to California. The next owner was a woman named Helen Porter, who lived there until 1912. The records showed that she had reported intruders to the police multiple times, but no intruders were ever found. She moved out suddenly, leaving most of her furniture behind. The house changed hands every few years after that. Each owner stayed for less than a decade. Some left quickly, some left quietly. One had died in the house. Maya found his name in the obituaries. Gerald Walsh, 67, died in his sleep. The obituary didn't mention how he died. It didn't mention anything else. The basement door had been locked when Maya moved in. She had assumed it was just an old lock, seized with rust. But the key was in the kitchen drawer. She had forgotten about it until now. She stood at the top of the basement stairs, the key cold in her palm, and thought about Margaret Thorne, 7 years old, found at the bottom of these stairs. She inserted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. The door swung open, revealing wooden steps descending into darkness. She flipped the light switch at the top of the stairs. Nothing happened. The bulb was dead or missing. She grabbed a flashlight from her car and went down anyway. The basement was unfinished. Stone walls, dirt floor, exposed joists overhead. It smelled of damp earth and something else, something sharp and metallic. She swept the flashlight beam across the space. It was small, maybe 10 by 15 feet. An old coal chute in one corner, a wooden shelf with rusted cans, and in the center of the floor, a trapdoor. It was set into the dirt, its edges flush with the ground. An iron ring bolted to its surface. Maya knelt beside it. The wood was old but solid. She grabbed the ring and pulled. The trapdoor didn't budge. She pulled harder. It creaked, shifted, and then held. She ran her fingers along the edges of the door. They were sealed with something dark and waxy. Someone had sealed the trapdoor shut. Maya didn't open the trapdoor. She stood over it for a long time, the flashlight trembling in her hand. And then she went back upstairs. She locked the basement door behind her. She didn't go down there again, but the house knew she had found it. That night, the doors didn't just open. They slammed. She woke to the sound of the spare bedroom door crashing against its frame. Then the closet door. Then the bathroom door. One after another, like a wave moving through the house. She lay in bed, frozen, listening to the violence of it. The walls seemed to shake. The air grew cold, so cold she could see her breath. And then the footsteps started, coming up from the basement, up the stairs, down the hallway. They stopped outside her door. The doorknob began to turn. Maya screamed. She didn't mean to. It tore out of her, raw and animal. The doorknob stopped turning. The footsteps retreated. She heard them go back down the hallway, down the stairs, down to the basement, and then silence. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the corner of her room with a pair of scissors in her hand, waiting for the sun to rise. The next morning, Maya called a locksmith and had every door in the house fitted with deadbolts. She had the basement door double locked. She had the trapdoor covered with a heavy wooden crate filled with cinder blocks. She was done being afraid. She was going to fight back. For 3 nights, nothing happened. The door stayed closed. The footsteps, Maya Chen's fingers hovered over the drawer handle for 3 seconds before she pulled it open. The wood groaned, and inside she found a single sheet of lined paper, folded into a tight square. She unfolded it carefully, expecting a forgotten receipt or a stray packing list. Instead, the handwriting was neat, almost mechanical, each letter formed with precision. It read, "You shouldn't be here." She's still watching. The words sank into her like cold water. She checked the door behind her still closed. The house had been empty for 6 months before she moved in. The realtor said the previous owner, a woman in her 70s, had passed away peacefully. Nothing about notes left behind. Maya told herself it was a prank, a leftover from open houses. But the paper was crisp, not yellowed. It felt fresh, like it had been placed there that morning. She read the note a second time, then a third. The words didn't change. She's still watching. Who was she? The previous owner. The house itself. Maya had chosen 217 S.E. Alder Street because it was affordable in Portland's insane market of fixer-upper, with original hardwood floors and a backyard that caught the afternoon sun. She had been so thrilled to finally escape her cramped studio apartment in the Pearl District that Shed ignored the odd feeling she got every time she walked through the front door. A prickling on the back of her neck, the way the hallway seemed longer than it should be. She crumpled the note and shoved it into her pocket. It was nothing. New house jitters. But the silence in the room felt heavier now, like something was pressing against the air around her, waiting for her to make a mistake. 2 weeks earlier, Maya had signed the closing papers with a smile so wide her cheeks ached. At 28, she was finally a homeowner. Her parents back in San Jose had been skeptical we Portland, Why, 100-year-old house with old wiring and a basement that smelled like wet concrete. But Maya wanted roots. She worked from home as a graphic designer, and the idea of a space that was fully hers, with a garden and a clawfoot tub, felt like a victory. The realtor, a brisk woman named Cheryl, had glossed over the property's history. The seller's estate, Shed said. An elderly lady, Alina Vance. She lived here alone for 40 years. No family to speak of. The house needs some love, but the bones are good. Maya hadn't asked questions. She'd been too busy imagining where to hang her prints and which shade of sage green to paint the kitchen. Moving day came with the usual chaos. Friends helped haul furniture. Pizza was ordered. Laughter echoed through empty rooms. But as the afternoon wore on, Maya noticed something odd. Every time she turned around, there was a small object out of place. A teacup on the mantel that she hadn't unpacked. A key ring dangling from the bathroom doorknob. She assumed the helpers had set things down absent-mindedly. Then she found the photograph face down on the kitchen counterray black and white portrait of a woman in her 60s with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to follow her. Maya flipped it over. On the back, in the same neat handwriting from the note, someone had written, Alina, 2019. She put it in a drawer and told herself it must have been left behind accidentally. But the eyes in that photo stayed with her even after she closed the drawer. On her third night in the house, Maya woke at 2:47 a.m. The clock on her nightstand glowed red. She lay still, listening. The house had old bone squeaks, and groans were normal. But this was different. A soft, rhythmic sound, like paper sliding against paper. She slipped out of bed and followed the noise to the hallway. The light was off, but she saw a thin band of yellow seeping from beneath the door to the spare bedroom, the door that she knew she had closed before bed. Now it was open a crack. Her heart thudded as she pushed it open. The room was empty. The desk lamp was on, casting a warm glow over a stack of papers, arranged neatly in the center of the floor. Each sheet had handwriting. She knelt and read the top line. You didn't check the attic. Maya almost called the police. But what would she say? Someone broke in to arrange papers. She grabbed her phone and a flashlight and pulled the attic ladder down from the ceiling in the hallway. The stairs groaned under her weight, the wood worn smooth by decades of use. The attic smelled of mothballs and old wood. She shone the light around old trunks, a dressmaker's dummy, a rocking chair that swayed gently even though no one had touched it. And on the floor, in the middle of the space, a single shoe, a woman's leather pump, polished, sitting as if someone had stepped out of it and vanished. Maya's breath caught. The shoe was new, no dust. She picked it up. Inside the heel, tucked into a slit, was a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. She wore these when she left. Ure wearing her clothes now. Maya's mind raced. She wasn't wearing Aliner's clothes. Everything she owned was from Target and thrift stores. But as she looked down at her pajama shirta vintage floral top shed, bought at a Goodwill in Northeast Portland, her stomach dropped. Shed picked it up months ago, before she even knew about the house. It was just a shirt, but now in the attic, with the rocking chair swaying, the words felt like a confession. She backed down the ladder, nearly losing her footing. She slammed the attic door shut and locked it from the hallway. Then she called her friend Jenna. She left a shaky message. Something weird is happening in the house. Please call me. She didn't go back to sleep. She sat on the living room couch with every light on, watching the front door, waiting for dawn. When morning finally came, the house looked ordinary again. Sunlight poured through the windows, and the birds were loud outside. Maya almost convinced herself Shed overreacted. Then she walked into the kitchen and saw the footprint, a single print, size 10 or 11, pressed into the tile near the back door. Mud still damp. She hadn't been outside since the rain stopped at midnight. She checked the door locked. She checked the windowsill secure. The footprint led nowhere. Just one isolated mark, as if someone had stepped in from the porch and then vanished. Think about this if that happened to you. What would you do? She took a photo and sent it to Jenna, who finally replied, "That's creepy. Maybe the house has a draft and dirt blew in." But Maya knew better. Portland mud was distinct. This was fresh, dark, and smeared slightly, as if the foot had twisted before disappearing. She decided to search the house methodically, room by room. She started in the basement, a dank space with a low ceiling and a single naked bulb that buzzed. The walls were old brick, and the floor was cracked concrete. In one corner, a set of metal shelves held dusty canning jars. Most were empty, but the third jar from the left was filled with a dark, syrupy liquid, and inside floated a folded piece of paper. Maya unscrewed the lid with a grunt. The liquid smelled like vinegar and rust. She tipped the jar and fished out the paper with a pair of tongs she found on a workbench. The paper was saturated, but not destroyed. She spread it on the concrete floor. The ink had bled, but she could read most of it. He visits when you're asleep. Don't open the door to the basement stairs. Her breath caught. She was standing in the basement, and the door to the basement stairs was right behind her, closed. Maya didn't move. She listened. The house above was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. The door behind her was solid wood, painted white, with a simple brass knob. She had come down those stairs 20 minutes ago. Nothing had followed her, but the note said he visits when you're asleep. She was awake. Was that the key? A temporary safety. She slowly turned and placed her hand on the doorknob. It was cold. She turned it, yanked the door open, and stared up the empty stairs. Just the same narrow wooden steps leading to the kitchen. She exhaled, feeling foolish. She slammed the basement door and locked it with the old bolt. Then she went upstairs and called a locksmith to change every lock in the house. It didn't make her feel any better. That night, unable to sleep, Maya dug into the history of the house. She found the obituary for Alder Vansittede at age 74. Cause of death not listed. Survived by no immediate family. A comment on a neighborhood blog mentioned that Alder had been eccentric and kept to herself. Then Maya found a police blotter from 5 years ago. A wellness check at 217 SE Alder Street. The report was brief cups entered. Found Alder alive, but confused. And she was taken to Oregon Health Science University for evaluation. No further details. Maya searched for news articles, but she found a mention in a local historian's page about strange events in the Ladd's Addition district, where her house was located. Unexplained lights, reports of a man seen in windows of vacant homes. The historian called it the Alder Street recurrence. The name sent a chill down her spine. The next day, Maya found the journal. She had been pulling up a loose floorboard in the hallway closet. Thought maybe she could store shoes in the space Benny at hand. There it was. A small leather book wrapped in a silk scarf. The journal was dated 1998 to 2004. The handwriting was Alder's, but more frantic. The letters jagged and pressed hard into the page. The entries started with normal complaints about neighbors, the garden, the weather. Then, in late 1999, a shift. He's back. I saw him in the backyard at dusk. He didn't move, just stood there by the fence. When I turned on the light, he was gone. I know his face. I've seen it before, but I can't remember where. The entries became increasingly paranoid. He leaves notes in my shoes. He knows what I eat for dinner. He knows my dreams. Maya felt her own skin crawl. The same was happening to her. Alder's journal described a pattern. Notes appearing in drawers. Objects moved. A sense of being watched constantly. She wrote about the basement, door opening by itself. About footprints in the garden. About a voice whispering her name in the attic. She never saw the person clearly, but she called him the visitor. And then, in 2004, The entries stopped abruptly. The last one read, "I know who he is now. I won't write it down because he reads everything. But I will stop him. I have a plan. If you find this, run." Maya closed the book. Her hands were shaking. She looked around the hallway, half expecting. Thank you for listening. If you're still awake, please leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to our channel. Sharing this with your friends helps others find this quiet place too. Good night. The rain will stay with you.